Everybody, crafting journey. How are you? That journey chick on Instagram. It's National Pencil Day. Woohoo! It's also Tuesday. It's also the next to the last day of the month, March 30th, 2021. I can't think of any better reasons to be here. Working on Alice. I pretty much got this section done. Oh, there's a little bit that I'm still working on right in here. What is that? I don't even know. Oh, that's her hair. Oh, so I opened up like her face section. I got to figure out like what am I going to do with these eyes? Ooh, maybe some 820. That would be pretty. Oh, yes. Okay, we'll keep that out. We will keep it out, keep it in mind. Do, 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 do. I feel like dancing, dancing. She's a dancing machine. What am I doing? Anyway, crazy. So I sat through Crystal's live last night. Y'all, I love every one of you. Crystal was there, Nana was there, Tia, Jeremy, who am I forgetting? Sarah. Is that everybody? Tia, Jeremy, Nana, Sarah, Crystal. Oh, I'm forgetting somebody. Shalene! All my favorite peeps. So they encouraged me to go get my planner because I've neglected my planner. I just have. It's just. So I'm going to go get it. I started last night because I was so inspired. Like they're sending us to all these websites where you can get stickers, and I'm like, oh dear, what have I done by watching this show? Yeah. Anyway, love you, Crystal. Thank you. You're just as good an enabler as all of us. So let's talk about National Pencil Day. So cool. So this celebrates the day that Hyman Lipman got his patent for the eraser. He decided that, historically pencils did not come with erasers. Erasers were separate, so he figured out a way to attach the eraser to the pencil, got a patent for it on this day in history, and there you go. We have the pencil as we know it. Now, why is it yellow? Because this particular company, let me see if I can find the name of it. L&C Hardtmuth Company of Austria-Hungary. They introduced a brand and they named it after a famous diamond. So everybody wanted their pencil to look like that pencil, so you would associate it with a high-end brand. So that's how we got yellow pencils. Things you did not know. Did you think you would learn that today? Yeah. So we know everything that pencils are good for. Construction, architecture, writing, some famous writers, like that is all they would use is pencils. Let me see, who used it? Vladimir Nabokov, I read all his books. Seriously, I have no idea who that is. But anyway, he rewrote everything he ever published, usually several times, by pencil. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. Vincent van Gogh only used Faber pencils as they were far superior to Carpenter's pencils. Anyway, Johnny Carson always had a pencil on his desk, but here's the rub. They always had two erasers because they didn't want any accidents on the set. Roald Dahl used only pencils with yellow casing to write his books. He began each day with 6 sharpened pencils, and only when all 6 became unusable did he resharpen them. Now, I don't know who that is either. Some famous writer. I'm terrible, aren't I? Okay, here's one we know. John Steinbeck. They said he used 300 pencils to write East of Eden. Now there's one we can get behind. I know who John Steinbeck is. Oh my gosh. And when pencils were first invented, they were used in the war, World War II. What they would do is at the pencil factory at night, after the factory closed, they would hollow out, they'd take the graphite out so that there would only be graphite at the end of the pencils. And in between the graphite, they would put maps. So the soldiers were each issued a pencil, and if they got captured as prisoners of war, they had a map to get away, to get out of there. It was a map of how to escape from where you were being held. How cool is that? Yeah. Pretty cool. I don't know if anybody ever used one. They said they put miniature compasses inside of them too. How? I don't know. They must have been big old fat pencils. Can you imagine? How do you put a miniature compass inside of a pencil? They did. Anywho, okay, let's start diamond painting. What color do we want to use? I'm in a mood today. Goodness gravy. What is going on with me? I slept in. That must be what is going on with me. What number did you just pour? I need more glue in this pen, because that glue is just about had it. For the metal 4-placer, I don't use, I've tried to use the museum wax, and it just does not seem to work. So I've gone back to, I'm using blue wax right now, which seems to be okay. But I still use the glue dots, and I still use the museum wax in my plastic tips. So we don't know what that's about. Shake, shake your booty, shake your booty. Oh look, we got a nice little rose. Okay, we are doing the F's. All right, so while we are diamond painting, we can talk about judge, jury, and journey. Okay, look, I got a whole book that I got to use for my trial coverage notes. I got this book at Ross, and one of the reasons I love these kind of books, I call them books, they're really, writing pads, is at the top you can see they have the calendar. You can mark the date, the month, and the date. I think that's so cool. So at the top of my notes for yesterday, I circled March, and then I circled the 29th. I love these things. Anyway, so one of the things that, this is the George Floyd death trial. Derek Chauvin is on trial. He is being accused of murdering George Floyd. He is charged with murder in the 2nd degree, murder in the 3rd degree, and manslaughter. Now the jury will have to choose one of those. You don't get to convict of all 3. But one of the issues in this case is going to be intent. Did he intend this to happen? Was it so reckless that you just can infer intent? So the prosecution, well, before I get there, the judge was instructing the jurors. All 15 showed up. So they sent the 15th one home. Because of COVID, this this trial, this courtroom is, there's more plexiglass in this courtroom than you could. It's just crazy. Everybody's surrounded by plexiglass, and they have like these little school desks for each juror, with surrounded by plexiglass. Um, so there was not room for the 15th juror anyway. He or she was just chosen to make sure that in case one of the 14 did not show up on yesterday, but they all showed up. So one of the things the judge instructed, and just to be clear, some of you think that this jury is sequestered. They are not sequestered. They will be sequestered during their deliberations, but for now, they are not sequestered. They have to come in every day and go home every night. Yay. What I noticed was everybody that is entitled to access to that courtroom, including, all of the prosecution, the defense. There's one spot for a family member of George Floyd. Crazy, isn't it? The jury, everybody, they have this badge on, and it hangs around their neck with a yellow cordage. So I'm assuming that if you don't have that on, you don't get into that courthouse or that courtroom. So what the judge told the jury was like, you're sitting, all you're allowed to tell anyone, is that you are sitting as a juror in a criminal case. You cannot tell them which case you're sitting on. Now he said, okay, now let's be realistic. Can you tell the family that you live with? Yes, you can. But they're also sworn to secrecy. He says, I realize, you're going to tell them. So, but he did tell them to avoid newspapers, all television, social media, to disable any news feeds they might have, notifications, turn off the radio. These people are going silence, silence. And I expect this thing to go on for probably a month. Could you guys do a month of no social media? I can't do a day without my social media, much less a month. What? Man, if yeah, I could see me, being questioned to be a juror. Can you be fair and impartial? Yes, I can, but I cannot go without social media for a month. Sorry, not going to happen. Just can't do it. Anyway, so Jerry Blackwell for the prosecution did the opening. He did a great job. He put up a badge, and he defined, what that badge means. He went through the oath that these police officers take when they put on that badge. I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately, never employing unnecessary force or violence. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of police service. Blah, 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 whatever that means. And that he betrayed this oath. How did he betray it? Because he used excessive force. It was intently dangerous without regard for its impact on the life of George Floyd. Now, one of the things, like when you see the family, they're wearing these face masks and it says 8:46, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, is what they think the time was that Derek Chauvin had his knee on the neck of George Floyd. Well, the prosecution said no, it was 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Huh? What? Yeah, 9 minutes. And they went through the timeline of this 9 minute and 29 seconds. George Floyd called out 27 times. He verbalized, I can't breathe. And his final words were, I can't breathe. And he was really saying, I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. I don't know. So think I need new wax in the tip as well. For the first 4 minutes or so, George Floyd was calling out. He was verbalizing. Then he goes motionless. Then for 3 minutes and 51 seconds, he lays there motionless. Bystanders are trying to help. They're trying multiple times. They're telling the police, please check the pulse, check the pulse. He's not moving. He's not moving. Check his pulse, which they never did. And during this 3 minutes and 51 seconds, despite the fact that George Floyd is no longer resisting because he's clearly passed out, Derek Chauvin never removes his knee from his neck. The ambulance comes, pulls up, paramedic gets out, walks over, checks his pulse, runs back to the ambulance. They grab a stretcher, bring the stretcher over, straighten the blanket out on the stretcher, and then at that point, Derek Chauvin takes his knee off the neck of George Floyd. Yeah. And they put him on the ambulance. They put him in the ambulance. The ambulance rushes to a nearby park because they did not want to do any kind of resuscitation there. Because make no mistake, this guy was in full arrest at this point. It's there's later evidence that was put on yesterday where the paramedics call in and say he's in full arrest. But they drive to this park that's a few blocks away to resuscitate him. And the reason they have to drive somewhere else is because by now there's a crowd of people and they don't want any violence. So they drive somewhere else. The driver gets out of the vehicle, goes into the back of the vehicle, and then they attempt their resuscitation. And then they drive him to the hospital where he is pronounced dead. Now, I haven't heard any evidence about what happens, during the ambulance ride or when he gets this. I don't know at what point he's actually declared, dead. I don't know if they ever get him back, get a pulse, I don't know. But they actually, at this point, the prosecution shows the entire film, the entire 9 minutes and 29 seconds of this film. And it was very graphic, very hard to watch. And I watch the Long Crime Network, and they have a reporter in, because I think there's 3 spots for media. So there is a reporter inside the courtroom. And what this reporter said happened while this film was being showed is that the 60-year-old woman that's a juror had her hand on her temple and was watching very, very intently. And that one of the female jurors gasped. Like at one point she just gasped. It is hard to watch. I found it very difficult to watch, especially at the point where this guy is motionless. I'm like, what is going on? What was he thinking? This is in my mind. Anyway. So then the prosecution goes on to say, this is what you're going to hear in the trial. They're going to bring on use of force experts to say that this was lethal force, that it was without cause, that the guy was defenseless, he was handcuffed, and he wasn't resisting here. So, and that they stopped anyone else from helping this guy. And that it was all over a counterfeit $20 bill. And we don't even know if George Floyd knew if this was a counterfeit $20 bill. Would I know if I had a counterfeit $20 bill? Hell no. I'm not that sophisticated. Now, was he? I don't know. I have no idea. So according to the prosecution, this was such a minor offense, this counterfeit bill, that they could have written him a notice to, just here's your notice to appear, here's your court date, show up and let the courts handle it. They didn't have to like get into this whole altercation with George Floyd. So we're going to hear during this trial various professionals, experts on police conduct, lots of video. Every bystander had a video going. You can't do anything without somebody's watching. There were cameras hidden on the streets, in other businesses. This particular area, from what I gathered, I mean, it never was said explicitly, but from what I could gather, and what I would probably surmise as a juror, is that this is not a great area of town. Yeah. So, what else? Oh, and one of the things they're going to show is that you never put a person that's in handcuffs face down on the ground, and it's called prone. When you're prone, it means you're face down on the ground, or face down. Supine is you're facing up, prone is you're facing down. So you never put a person that's handcuffed face down on the ground, because their airway, you got to protect their airway. So as soon as possible, police are taught that you turn them to their side so that their airway is clear. Now, and prosecution did acknowledge that this man struggled with opioid addiction, but and this I thought was the weakest part of their opening, and they didn't really expound on it. They said that the behavior George Floyd was exhibiting during this whole event was not consistent with an opioid overdose. Okay. So now we go on to the defense's opening statement. I do need glue in my pen. So the defense attorney says, use reason and common sense. There's always two sides to a story, and he wanted the jury to hear the totality of the story. That, reason is the application of sound judgment. So what the defense attorney was describing, that between the FBI and the police and all the different investigators, there were over 50 police officers investigated, 200 eyewitnesses. There were 12 search warrants issued, 50,000 pages of documents, and there's over 400 people on the witness list. Yay! We're in for a wild ride, aren't we? So he actually describes the whole scene for us. It takes place at this place called Cup, which is C-U-P, Cup Foods. Now, I have never been to Minneapolis. I can't even say Minneapolis. So I'm not familiar with Cup Foods, but it seemed almost like a little place where you could just go in and pretty much buy anything. I don't know. So shortly after 7 p.m. on May 25th, George Floyd goes into this store with a friend. He sees his ex-girlfriend in there. He offers her a ride home. Now, the store clerk, when he calls this into the police later on, says he felt like George Floyd was under the influence. And those are the words he used. And I expect he's going to be a witness, and we'll hear how he was under the influence. He bought a pack of cigarettes, used this counterfeit $20 bill. And then he leaves. So the store clerk realizes, hey, this is a counterfeit $20 bill. Now, I don't know how you realize that. I've never worked as a cashier. I don't know how that works. But so then George goes out, and he's sitting in his vehicle, which is a Mercedes-Benz. I don't have a Mercedes-Benz. George Floyd had a Mercedes-Benz. Wow, nice. So they're sitting in his Mercedes-Benz, And the clerk says, you know, your $20 bill was fake. You need to pay for these cigarettes. He refuses. Clerk goes back in, comes back out a second time, says, hey, I'm going to call the cops because you need to pay for these cigarettes. And George Floyd says, nope, not going to do it. Um, so the clerk goes back in, calls the cops. Um, then there's about 20 to 30 minutes before the police actually arrive. So now we're going to hear from the ex-girlfriend, and what she's going to testify to is during that period of time, George took a couple of pills. Now she thinks they were Percocet, and that he kept falling asleep, and her and the friend were trying to wake him up because they knew the police were coming and they couldn't keep him awake. That's interesting. That'll be interesting testimony. When the officers get there, they approach the vehicle and they instruct George to put his hands up. He refuses. Or to show his hands. Show your hands, which I understand. They want to make sure there's no weapons. At some point, George tries to swallow more pills to conceal them, I guess. There's a struggle that ensues to get him into the police car, and there's lots of footage of that that's going to be shown. A later search of George Floyd's vehicle does reveal he spit the pills out. And they find the pills and they find his DNA on the pills. The defense is this is going to be a huge issue in the case, cause of death. The defense is going to say the cause of death was coronary disease caused by hypertension and ingestion of drugs, namely fentanyl. So the first witness was a dispatcher, and poor thing, she looked scared to death, but, very well educated, nice girl. She described that entire night. She kind of set out the timeline for what happens. And what she says is that in the dispatch center, there's televisions. There's 9 different TV screens where at certain times, if her supervisor can turn on cameras at the scene, I don't know how they do that. She said there's cameras all over the city, and if it's something that they can see, the supervisor will turn the camera on. So, she's still doing her job. She's got other calls going, but she kept looking up at the screen, and this scene was playing out, and she could see what was happening. So at one point she looks up at the screen and she sees them remove him from the vehicle and put him on the ground, and there's 3 officers on him. One guy's got his knee on his neck. I don't know if she could actually see that, but she could see that there were 3 officers holding this guy down to the ground. So she goes back to doing her job. She looks up again a little bit later, and she thought that her screen had frozen because it's the same scene she saw a few minutes ago. But then she starts seeing movement, and she realizes they're still in the same position they were in a few minutes ago, that the screen is not frozen. So she gets on the phone. By the time she gets the sergeant, she wants to call their sergeant. By the time she gets him on the phone, the ambulance has come and they've gotten George Floyd and he's gone. But she gets him on the phone and she's like, hey, I don't mean to be a snitch, but I've got 3 officers that are on top of this guy. I'm concerned about the use of force. They've been in the same position. She's like, well, they're gone now, but they were in the same position for a very long time. And the sergeant was very nonchalant about it. He's like, yeah, it's probably just a takedown. That doesn't count. And it didn't sound like he was moved by the entire thing at all. Apparently he did head to the scene, but the scene was over by the time he got there. So some really interesting stuff. Then they put on witness number 2, who was this woman who worked across the street at the Safeway. She did some filming, but I didn't see that it really added any value to what we had already seen. She was very, very nervous and, dare I say, not the brightest bulb in the drawer. Let's put it that way. She, I don't know what her motivation was, but I can't remember. Oh, I don't know. Well, it was so long ago that, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a woman that just wanted some attention. I don't know. And I felt so sorry for the prosecutor because he'd ask her a question and she'd go, "What? Can you repeat that?" Like she didn't understand. So he'd ask the question slower, which doesn't make it any more understanding because you're using big words. But then witness number 3, super interesting. It was the direct examination of this witness. It's not completed yet. It'll resume this morning with his direct and cross. But this is also a bystander who had a background in martial arts and security. And he came on the scene. He was headed to Cup Foods to get a drink. And he watched this entire thing unfold. He kept telling Chauvin, "Listen, you've got him in a blood hold. You have him in a blood hold. Check his pulse." So apparently in wrestling, there's different types of holds, and he explained that. And this blood hold is where the knee is on your carotid. He didn't say carotid, but it's on, the blood vessels here, and it's going to cut off your circulation. And he was also filming, and he showed what he was filming, and he said that the officer kept shimmying, and so he said, the prosecution said, "Describe what you mean by shimmying," and you could see Chauvin's foot, like the foot that, the same foot, as the knee that he has down on his neck. He lifts it up and then he puts pressure on the ground, and he says every time he does that, it allows that hold to go, like the knee to go further into place. It tightens the hold, and you can see that he's doing this several times. That he uses his foot to shimmy his knee into that groove between the shoulder and the neck. The shoulder and the head into that neck. I thought it was super interesting. And he also cried out, check the pulse, and he was ignored. And so there was an officer that was kind of doing crowd control. And one of the things the officer said was, "This is what drugs do to you." So I don't know if that was an appropriate response or not, but that's what he said. So that's where we're at with George Floyd. Day 1. I know, it was a lot of information. So what I plan to do is probably, I'm covering the trial each day. So because Monday, I'll do Friday's trial, coverage on Saturday. So Mondays is going to be like a wrap-up show. I'll kind of speak to what we talked about all week. I'll answer any questions that you may have during the week. If you have questions that I can answer for you on Monday during the wrap-up show, then it may, or I could do a separate show, the trial wrap-up. I could do it live where you can ask questions, or I could just record it and you could send me your questions. Let me know how you want me to do it, but I can do a wrap-up show. Either do you want it part of the morning show, or do you want a separate wrap-up show? Let me know. Either way, you know me, I'll do it. I'll do it. Because I'm sure you guys might have questions. Okay, so what happened this day in history? Other than the pencil was, eraser was patented to the pencil. Also this day in history, Ronald Reagan in 1981, he goes into this labor union, gives a speech, comes out, and is shot. Yes, the bullet just misses his heart, pierces his lung, hits 3 bystanders, including this man named Brady. who gets shot in the eye. The other two officers recovered, but Reagan was famous for saying, honey, I forgot to duck, which is what he said to his wife. And then he told the surgeons, God, I hope you guys are Republicans, which I thought was pretty funny. But so he had to have surgery because it pierced his lung. But they said that he was able to walk into the hospital on his own power. However, and apparently he didn't even realize he'd been shot until after they shoved him into the car and they were on his way to the hospital. So who shot him? Hinckley, John Hinckley Jr. was the shooter, and he was declared insane and incompetent to stand trial and spent the next 38 years in a mental institution. And he was 20 something at the time. So he spent 38 years in a mental institution before he was finally released to go live with his mother. But he has to live a certain distance from the mental institution, among other requirements. Interesting. And they said he was trying to reenact this movie, Taxi Driver. He was obsessed with Jodie Foster. So this was his way of reenacting this scene from the movie where this politician gets shot. I don't know. Strange outcome for trying to shoot a president, that you get 38 years in a mental institution. Okay. So guys, I've got far afield. I probably am going to have to start extending the morning show by 10 minutes or so. I hope you guys don't mind. But this is a huge trial. I do want to bring it to you. Outside of the courtroom yesterday, not a whole lot going on. There was shows of support by people kneeling, which I thought was nice. The family too. So, all right, guys, I'm going to go watch the trial. I'm working at the same time, like I'm doing my work. I've got my iPad here. I'm listening. I'm taking notes. I'm working. My brain is going 100 miles an hour most of the day, which is probably why I slept in today. I turned it off for a little while last night. Okay. I love you all. I hope you enjoyed day one of the trial coverage. Take care, and I will see you in the morning show tomorrow.